Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll start in 2 minutes. So I think that we can start. Welcome everyone to the live session of Rookout and FinOut with Nomi, a product manager at Rookout, and Itzhar, co-founder and CTO of FinOut. So Itzhar, it's your stage.
Thank you, Omer. Let me share my screen. Great. So, hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Izar. I'm the CTO and one of the three co-founders here at FinOut. FinOut is a platform for cost observability and the entire FinOps domain in general. And today we'll be speaking about how we can manage and reduce our log costs from a FinOps perspective. So, as I'm sure some of you are aware, logs are these day-to-day means of our application to tell which state it's in. And as some of you probably know, the cost of logs are accumulating to very high numbers. And in the current economic climate, we are obligated to take action about it, because if we don't, then these costs are going to be very significant in a part of the overall cost that we always in a fight to reduce. So let's talk a bit about the challenges and what's actually hard about reducing the cost of logs. And it starts with three simple reasons. First and foremost, it's unstructured data that arrives in very high volumes and very high variance. It doesn't always have specific commonalities, and we need to figure out the structure of it in order to even start analyzing and reducing its cost. Second reason is that cost monitoring and analysis tools, are becoming more and more challenging to use when you have a lot of items in your cloud environment. For instance, if you have several cloud providers and several SaaS providers, it can be pretty tricky to track the log cost of all of them. And also we have a delicate balance between data retention and cost, because of course we want to be able to retain all of the logs for the entire history, but obviously that's going to cost us, so that's another challenge that we want to handle. So what can we do, and how can we get a certain set of rules that if we apply, we're going to be in an okay state? So we decided to take it apart to 4 steps in order to make this entire jungle a bit more controlled. So the first and foremost, we're going to start by measuring, because in the entire FinOps practice, we believe that in order to improve something, you need to be able to observe it and to create reliable metrics to know what exactly we want to improve. So what we need to have when we start this journey is a centralized place that's very accessible to us, that allows us to see the number of logs that we have in the system broken down into dimensions that are relevant to us in order to improve, whether it's log level or source system, in any other dimension breakdown that we might be able to see what causes logs to be bigger than what they should. So once we have that, we can start talking about general tips that would probably get us to a good start. And the first one is to enable selective logging, because as you saw in the previous measurement that we created, once we observed our logs in the breakdown of level, we can immediately notice that a lot of the logs are info, and that could allow us to make a decision. Maybe we don't even want to store info level logs. So that's one way of saving costs around logs. Another method is to set up retention policies, because we probably don't want to store logs forever. Okay, we need to not be emotionally attached to our logs, and really ask ourselves for how long do we need the logs of each source system, and to apply these rules. And another thing we could do is to identify repetitions around logs. Sometimes services in our system log multiple times for the same event, and we can totally eliminate that and improve our utilization of our logs. So just implementing these alongside a good and reliable and accessible measurement should probably get us to a good start. Any questions so far before I proceed? Great. So what if we have applied all of these, but we still have high costs for our logs? What can we do then? So what we want to do in that situation is that I'm going to show you some a bit slightly more advanced approaches that we can use that should also improve our state. And in the end of I will also explain a bit how we implemented it at FinOut, so you will get a better clue how to use it. So one misconception is that all of our logs need to be indexed and very real-time retrieval. So that's not always the case. So for some logs, we are able to archive them on cold and efficient storage, thus saving a lot of costs. And that also enables us to compress the logs, and saving even more on data transfer and processing costs, because smaller files are easier to transfer. And that could be a very efficient way if we don't need a super real-time retrieval of these logs. Another method is to automate log analysis. For instance, we can automatically extract insights from the logs using automated tools or even a machine learning tool to automatically retrieve some insights from the data. And once we've already analyzed our logs, we might be able to delete them already and to continue only using the insights that we've extracted from them. Another mean is to apply some sort of sampling on the logs. For instance, if a system has a great amount of logs, we might be able to sample it by only sending to our logging system only 10% of these logs to get the same value that we would get if we had the 100% of these logs. We can also improve that by applying some optimization to which 10% we decide to log, but that's a more advanced use case. All right, and after we did all of the patterns that we can do to improve our log cost, we are now going to talk about some patterns that we want to avoid that are constantly repeating in systems. And the first one is a lot of people that use logs sometimes end up using the log system for something that they should use a metrics system for instance, and that usually looks like this. This example is from Boris Turkaski, who works at FinOut, who writes a lot of excellent content. I recommend you pay a visit. And what we see here is an event that a developer decided to log, and the only insight here is how many times it occurred in a certain period of time. And this is exactly something that we could have used the metrics for, and it would have been a lot cheaper and more effective and faster to query. So be mindful of that. Another anti-pattern is, let's say we have already filtered all of the info in the debug and only have error levels in our system. There's a phenomenon that could occur whenever there's an error in the system, and it's a cascading error. For instance, if a certain microservice in a multi-microservice environment has a certain exception, it could trigger a lot of exceptions following it. And for the end user who needs to analyze these logs, all that matters is that there was an exception. So what we can do about that is to add an in-memory caching or a latch layer that aggregates all of these exceptions and only logs what's relevant, that there was an error and all the relevant data in a single log message if it occurred in a certain period of time. Okay, I'm going to show you now a bit of examples of how we did things at FinOut. But first, let's see if there's any relevant questions. Okay, that's great. Right, so what we applied here at FinOut is we are compressing our logs and sending them to cold storage, a lot of them actually. We realized that we had a use case that required us to analyze a very large amount of logs, and we decided the architecture that we want to tackle this, and eventually we decided not to index them on fast and expensive solutions, but rather we stored them on S3, and we are compressing them and querying them using services like AWS Athena that you might have heard of. And in general, it's a huge money saver if you want to have a very long retention period for the logs. And another method that we've applied is to drop logs, obviously, because when we first started writing our microservices, we didn't have any filters, and it started to spike very fast. And we analyzed it, and we saw that we can that there were specific families of logs that were very redundant in the system that we didn't need. And thanks to our observability layer that we built to analyze which logs are redundant, we decided we can just drop all of them. And applying these two methods saved us quite a bit of money. All right, so that's about it. And if you're still confused, try reaching out to your company's FinOps who might have a better understanding of how to tackle these sort of cost issues. And you can also keep in mind that logs cost is probably not the entire picture in your organization, and you should have a wider perspective at what cost challenges you want to address first. That's it. Do you have any questions? Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Izal. Okay, so I'll take it from here. Just a moment. Okay. Sorry, just a moment. Okay. So I'd like to talk to you guys about how to cut down on logging costs as well as debugging pain. My name's Naomi. I'm a first-time speaker. It's my first time. Outside of my job, my passions are swing dancing, rock climbing, and playing the saxophone. And I'm currently a product manager at Rookout, where we develop developer-first observability tools. Before I came here, I was a software developer, and I was a chronic overlogger. So I experienced this logging FOMO, this fear of missing out, which led me to write way too many logs. I felt it especially at the beginning of my my first position as a junior backend developer. I was responsible for writing a new service that had to do with permissions. It was very important. It was important that nothing go wrong. And if things did go wrong, I needed to understand immediately what happened. And it led me to writing so many more logs than were necessary. I was putting logs at the beginning and the end of every function. I was putting the same data objects in there in multiple places, getting that same object again and again. It was a very heavy object in a lot of cases, and it was hard to make sense of it when I was looking at those logs in production. And I also really struggled with removing them. So and that was a problem that I think a lot of people can relate to. That logging FOMO that makes you just put all those logs in there just in case. Each log is a very small object. It's just a log line. It's just a string. It has just a few things in it. It doesn't feel like a big deal when you're adding it. It feels like there's a lot more to lose by not adding that log than to gain by adding it in. So in this talk, we're going to talk about the cost of logging, how much it's actually costing us and why it is a big deal, the value that we're getting from those logs, and how to reduce that spending. So first of all, why should we care as R&D managers? So logs are the #1 expense in the realm of R&D tools for almost every company. Small companies are spending in the thousands of dollars every year. Larger corporations can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on logs. In today's market, it's especially, we feel it especially hard right now. Everyone's looking on ways to cut back on expenses, and logs are a great place to start. Also, the cost of logs goes up year over year. On average, it's between 20 and 40% year over year. So by cutting back on logs today, you can avoid that exponential growth. So we've talked about why we add all these logs, logging FOMO. People just want that information available when they need it, and that the cost really does add up, and it becomes this huge expense for R&D teams. But is it worth it? At the end of the day, if you are spending thousands of dollars a year or hundreds of thousands on this tool that serves you well in times when you really need it, it might not be that bad. The problem is that logs really aren't the best tool that we have today to debug, and people don't love using them in every case. And that's for a number of reasons. First of all, it can often be hard to find the logs that you're looking for. So if you've written that code yourself, you've written those logs yourself, you might remember how you structured them, how you formatted them. Your company might have a standardized way of writing logs in general, but not always. So first of all, if you wrote them yourself, if you wrote them a week ago, good chance you know how to find them. If you wrote them 2 months ago, you might not. I know that when I was in my first role, I would have to go back to my source code and remember how I had phrased it, how I had structured my whole logging architecture in order to make sure I was finding the right logs from that right point in time in the system. And that was logs that I wrote myself. If other people wrote them and there was no standard, it could be a lot harder to find those logs. If there is a standard, that takes a lot of effort for the company. The company has to put a lot of effort into writing those logs, writing those standards, training everyone, and then, of course, enforcing it requires longer code reviews sometimes. And then even if you do find what you're looking for, you find that log from the right place, you know what you're looking at, you know why you're looking at it, it might not have all of the information that you need. Companies with that are practicing good logging practices will make sure to limit the amount of information you put in that log. So you might not have everything that you need when you need it. At the end of the day, we know that only a very small percentage of logs that are indexed are actually read. A few percent is a very high estimate of the amount of logs that are actually ever accessed by anyone in the company. So we're spending a lot of money on a resource that we're not getting a lot of value out of. We're not reading most of those logs that we have highly available. And even when we are accessing them, it's not the most comfortable way to debug. So this is a problem. And the solution is clear. We should be spending less on logs. Logs are still important. Logs are, they're important for many reasons. It's important to keep that record of what's happened in your system, definitely for compliance reasons, for security reasons, but we're using it, we're spraying them all over the place, we're using them too much, and the cost is just not justifying it at this point. So how can we reduce that cost? Yizhar brought up many points. I'll talk about a few of them. Firstly, we have retention. Companies generally go between a week and a month on their retention rates for logs, depending on their need. We know that almost 90% of debugging sessions, you only need to look at data that's happening now. The issue is happening, it's still happening. We can reproduce it in production, or we can at least see users who are experiencing that same issue right now. There is no need to look at that historic data. So it's a good idea to evaluate whether there is too high a retention rate in your system. Secondly, we have ingestion. Ingestion is simply logs coming out of your service and going to your log aggregator. So this can be as simple bureaucratically or mechanically as lowering your logging verbosity, reevaluating your services, seeing if their log level is too high. Info might be necessary for logging those transactions, depending on how you use your levels, but developers feel very comfortable spraying those debug logs all over the place. It might not be a good idea to write them ever in production. Worth checking out. Secondly, cleanup. That's a much more expensive task for an R&D team, but it has a lot of benefits. So by removing logs that aren't necessary, or collecting less info in logs that are already there and you don't want to remove, you can save a lot of cost. You can also save a lot of the effort that it takes to query those logs. As soon as your service has much cleaner logs, it's much more straightforward what information to get. Maybe there's only one at the beginning of a function and includes the name. Like you can also have that restructuring that can help people query. It can help you save money by ingesting less. Thirdly, we have indexing. So indexing is that process of making your logs accessible, making them available to immediately query. Here we always have, there's a cost benefit here. Cold storage costs a fraction of the cost of hot storage, and it's essentially an archive where you have access to the data. It's still there for all of the security and compliance reasons that you would need to keep data. You're covered, but of course it's less available. So when you do need it, there is a cost there. It's worth assessing whether you have more things in hot storage than need to be there. As I said before, a tiny fraction of the logs that are in hot storage that are indexed are actually accessed. So if we can methodically go through and see which logs can be moved to cold storage, we can save a huge amount of money. all of the solutions that I've outlined come down to one question. Can we really say goodbye to most of our logs? There's no magic solution here. If we want to spend less on logs, we need to have less access to logs. And then the question is, can we say goodbye to that logging FOMO? That logging FOMO that I experienced as a junior developer and a lot of other people can relate to. Can each developer feel comfortable and confident in maintaining the services they're responsible for without all of the logs that they're used to receiving? So I say yes. There are many tools out today that can help, that are better ways to debug. They're better tools for the task of debugging production issues, and when we implement them, we can say goodbye to most of our logs. So the solution that I'd like to discuss is dynamic debugging with snapshots. A snapshot is a complete picture, a complete rich contextual data of your whole system at some point in time. It's essentially everything that you could possibly put into a log and more. All the local variables, stack trace, process information, and you can stream that from your system when you need it. So there's a crisis, there's a production issue, you decide these are the places where I need to know everything that's happening. Data is redacted automatically. The service that I was putting together as a junior developer, that was a permission service. I put a lot of effort into making sure to redact the data where it needed to be redacted. You don't need to do that when you have these snapshots where you can just in one place determine what's being redacted. Format is streamlined. You have complex data objects. It's not a problem. You just see them as they are in your code, as you're used to seeing them in your IDE. That's how you see them in a snapshot. Additionally, the cost is predictable and it's fixed. You're only streaming data that you need when you need it. That price isn't going up when you have more traffic. It's much easier to maintain. It doesn't get out of hand as time goes on. So I would like to show you, because I'm sure you're all wondering by now, what dynamic debugging actually looks like. So I would love to show you. But first, if there are any questions, I'd love to answer them. Okay. So this is Rookout, and here we have a, here I'm looking at the source code of a project, a to-do app, a very simple production application where I can add items, remove items, update items, mark them as completed. And I'm going to look at this function, add to do. I'm going to add a non-breaking breakpoint. That means that every time this line is hit, I'll get a snapshot, but I will not stop the code from running. And then I'm going to add an item to my to-do list. So now that I added a to-do item, I got a snapshot. As you can see, this is complete contextual data, everything that's happening. All of my local variables, such as new to-do record with the ID that was generated and my title. And I have my stack trace and more. So to sum things up, logging isn't working for us. The cost benefit is not justifying itself with the tools that are available and the current market. There are better solutions such as dynamic debugging, where you can get complete contextual data. It's much more fun to debug that way. It's much easier to debug that way. And when we've implemented that kind of solution, we can say goodbye to most of our logs. The logs can take a back seat, and we can put most of it, either remove it completely or put it in cold storage. Thank you. If there are any more questions, please let me know.
So it's not much of a question, Naomi. It's more of a, I can totally relate to what you are saying, that logs are an inferior solution in everything that regards debugging your code. You go to logs when there's no better choice to debug it. And what you've shown here is a really interesting approach.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Does anyone have any questions regarding the previous presentation about low cost? Great. So I believe that thank you everyone for participating.
Thanks for joining.
Us. Bye bye.